Do I need to say my name? This interview is with Isabel Bader on Thursday, July 27th, 2017. My name is Jane Avner, and I will be interviewing her. So welcome, Isabel.
Welcome.
Looking forward to speaking to you. I want to start by going chronologically with your life and finding your full name with your maiden name and when and where you were born.
My name is Isabel Louise Overton Bader. I was born in New Liskeard, Ontario, Canada, on the 1st of November 1926.
And who were the first family members to settle in Canada?
I don't know when my mother's family settled there. I mean, obviously they came from somewhere else, but as far as we know, my mother was Canadian. Certainly her grandmother was born there, and I don't know whether they came from I feel there is some connection with Pennsylvania Dutch, but I don't know the details of that. My father was born in England, and he came out in 1906 to Halifax, and then went with friends that he met on the trip across. They were going north, and he didn't really know where he was going, but he went north to Ontario.
And what caused them to go to Ontario? And to a rural part of Ontario, correct?
Yes, my father did. Well, he didn't really have any specific destination in mind as far as I know, but he did meet a couple on the trip over, and they said, well, we're going north, would you like to accompany us? And he said yes. Marlis, where are you going? And they said, well, just north of Toronto. And it turned out that just north of Toronto was 350 miles north, and that's where he went.
And what did he have a profession at that time?
Yes, he had wanted to be an electrician, and his father had said that this was a phase and a fun thing, and he'd never make a living at that, and he wanted him to learn something that would be really useful, and so he was apprenticed as a cabinet maker. And he made fine cabinets, except that, of course, when he got to where he was going, nobody wanted a fine cabinet. They were very happy if they could build a house. So he never did make fine cabinets.
And what did he end up doing?
Well, he ended up doing whatever he could do. He was English. And at the time, many, certainly, of the British people who came across were remittance men. That is, their parents, for whatever reason, had arranged with their child that he would receive funds if he never came back. So presumably it was some kind of skullduggery, whether he had married the wrong person or got into a scrape, I don't know. But my father was not a remittance man, but the signs said no Englishman need apply. And so he took what he could get, which was logging or building houses or whatever.
And how did he meet your mother?
Well, I don't know how he met her. I never asked that question, but they ended up both being in New Liskeard. My grandma lived in New Liskeard, and that's where I was born, at my grandmother's. And my father had a farm to begin with. Of course, they were giving a farm, almost giving it away, and the country was all squared off, so that the land was all in blocks. And he took a block, and he was followed shortly afterwards by his elder brother, who had gone to South Africa, but couldn't stand the apartheid there, and who followed him to Canada. So the two brothers had farm. My Uncle Arthur had a family, which he brought over with him, but Dad was always interested in studying, and of course the winters were long and you couldn't farm, you know, Canada's cold up there. And one time he went to help his brother bring in the harvest, and as he walked back, he realized there was a fire going on. When he finally reached his own farm, everything was burnt to the ground. The potatoes were cooked in the ground. Everything was gone except a tin trunk that he had. And he moved into Liskeard, which was at least a town, and he looked for something that he could do there. I must have met Mum. They both went to church. I don't know that there was an Anglican church. Dad was Anglican, and Mum, I think, was Baptist. I'm not sure of that.
And about how big a town was New Liskeard?
I don't know. Kirkland, when I left it, which is where I ended up growing up in Kirkland, which was another 60 miles north, was about 35,000. Liskeard was a farming community. It was good farming land, even though the season was short. And so it was more widespread. Kirkland was a mining town. It was gold mining largely, and there was a mile of gold. Prospectors had taken land in all along this mile. There were 7 or 8 different gold mines that extended back.
When did your family move from Liskeard to Kirkland?
Well, the year before my parents planned to marry, 2 of my mother's brothers drowned. And she had 3 brothers. There were 3 sisters, 3 brothers, and then 2 more sisters. The 2 younger brothers drowned. They'd gone out in a canoe in the Wabi River, and the ice has not gone out. And they were wonderful swimmers, but they simply froze. They couldn't get into the canoe. And the older brother, 17, was so lost, I guess, with his 2 brothers gone, that he took off and went to Brandon, Manitoba, miles away, to join the Mounties. And my mother said to my father, not my father obviously at the time, that she couldn't go and leave her mother with the situation that was there. My grandfather was a salesman of farm equipment, and he traveled around the farms and so on, and was away a great deal of the time, and was a very poor provider for Grandma. And she had to take in boarders in order to keep the family together. The children kept arriving, and so Mum stayed, and Dad said he couldn't really remain in Liskeard. And so he went further north, another 250 miles odd, to Timmins, and got a job in the gold mine. And so when they married at Grandma's, the next year they moved to Timmins. And my sister was born in Timmins in 22. Mum and Dad were married in 20. And I was born in 26. And the situation in Timmins, the folks in the mining community were tended to be rough and tough. And Dad was always interested in studying and in the Bible. And so he had traveled ever since he'd come, from one little community to another little community, acting as someone who would take the service on a Sunday. And so when his shirts wore out, the white shirts wore out, Mum would turn the collars and cuffs and cut them down, and he'd wear them to work. And it caused problems. So in the end, he decided they'd move down, try in Kirkland Lake, and they moved when I was 2.
And so that at that point there were how many children in the family?
My sister and myself.
Mm-hmm.
Mom had a stillborn boy in between, which that's why when I was born, she went down to Grandma's to have me, because she had lost the baby up in Timmins.
And I would assume that housing and life was on the rough side.
Yeah.
And what was your house like? Do you remember?
No, but I've got photographs of the house in Timmins. But Dad, I don't know whether he built that house or what he did with it, but he had a lovely porch and garden. He always had a garden wherever he was. That was one of the first things he arranged around the garden. We moved down to Kirkland in what I fondly call the shack. I mean, I was 2, I have no idea what it looked like, but I know that they were not in there for very long. Turned out they had bed bugs, and Mother was absolutely aghast. She'd never had any such thing. So they moved then to 8 Second Street. And there were streets, but Kirkland was all on the rock. Everything was on the rock. So every street was going up and down, and the sidewalks did the same. And it was a tough place to grow up in.
And how big a town was Kirkland?
How big?
Mhm.
Well, when I left, it was about 35,000.
Okay. Okay, and then after you and your sister were born, were there more children?
Yes, my brother was born in 30.
Mm-hmm.
He was born in Kirkland.
And your father was no longer working in the mines, so what was he doing?
Yes,
then?
no, he was working in the mines, but he didn't go underground.
Ah.
He was in charge of surface work, making pit props and building houses. Me and the management had lovely houses, and other folks had whatever
So would
they
you
could get.
consider him a prosperous man at that point?
Not really, no.
Mm.
I mean, he was very poorly paid. When he finally stopped working voluntarily, because Mom said she would rather have him alive than to work for another few months or something or other, he didn't get any pension of any kind.
And what kind of an education did you get in Kirkland?
It was a very good school. The schools there were good. Pardon me. Mother said when she married, if we have children, I want them to have a good education and music. And that's what we had.
And in terms of church going, it was Church of England, or?
Well, Dad, of course, was Church of England, but I don't think there was an Anglican church in New Liskeard when he first went there. There certainly was years later. And neither was there in Kirkland, I guess. I guess the majority of the mining people who were working underground they were all relatively recent immigrants, many of them from Europe. And in the end, in Kirkland, there was a Roman Catholic church for the French, Roman Catholic church for Ukrainians, there were all kinds of churches, and eventually there was a Ukrainian church. The first church I can remember when we went to, I don't know what we did early on, when we did go to church in Kirkland, was up on the top of a craggy place, and I think it was probably Methodist, I don't know.
Did you go to Sunday school?
Oh yes, we went to Sunday school, and we read the Bible every Sunday, and we sang in every choir that was going, whatever church we were at.
And do you consider that it was a religious family?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there was no drink of any kind in the house, and Dad didn't drink or smoke, never did. Any of us knew anything about any of that.
But the emphasis on education became something in terms of sending you for higher education.
Well, Marion, my sister, didn't want to go on. School went to grade 13, high school went to grade 13, and in her grade 13 year, she did a commercial course, and she remained at the high school as the secretary to the principal for many years. And I went to high school. I don't recall any kind of guidance of any kind, counseling as to where I should go. I guess there must have been some thought of my going to an Anglican, because by that time we were going to an Anglican, the Anglican church, going to an Anglican college at Toronto, because Toronto was pretty well 250 miles south of Kirkland.
Mm-hmm.
And that was the easiest place to get. But I went to Victoria, which was
Victoria College.
well, it was Victoria. Yes, there's Victoria College and Emmanuel College, and together they're Victoria University, which is one of the universities in the University of Toronto. There's St. Michael's, there's Trinity, there are all number of universities, all under the heading of the University of Toronto.
And Was it common for women to move on into university, to go to college in Kirkland?
I don't remember.
You don't remember
I
being
don't remember
unusual
anything
that way?
about that.
Mhm.
No, not being unusual. Certainly, Mom and Dad would like Mary to have gone, but she'd always worked hard. We had the violin, and she worked hard at schoolwork, and we were in the choir all the time. So there was choir rehearsals and 2 services on Sunday.
Books
Her
in the
life was
home.
busy,
Mhm.
and she just felt she'd had enough and didn't want to go.
But the tenor of the town is my question, that education was valued because you said there were good schools and.
The schools were good.
Mhm.
Yeah, the schools were good.
And what was your emphasis in terms of schooling when you got to Victoria? What did you emphasize, in terms of, did you have a major or was it general studies?
I took history and modern languages, so I took history, Spanish, and French. And they were in different colleges. I had history across in University College. I had French at Vic, and I had Spanish somewhere else. I never built up the way some girls did. For instance, girls who were taking home economics. They did all their classes together. They would be taking science classes and various other classes. The friend that I ended up going to England with had a wonderful community, and I used to meet when I came back for reunions upon occasion. I never had more than 2 or 3 friends in the group of people that I separated off to go to my classes.
So you graduated with a degree in like a bachelor, is it comparable to the U.S.?
I got an honors BA.
An honors BA. And after you completed that, then what did you do?
The only thing I wanted to do was to go to England. My dad was English, and I had long had the idea that my grandpa would like me. I only had one grandpa, and he was in England. And Dad took Marion, my sister, who was 3.5 years older, took her to England in 1937, and I wanted to go. I was dying to go, and he knew that. And, he was going back for the first time to see his father, so I don't know when he had been last, but it was a very long time. And he simply couldn't take me, but he said, I'll take you in 5 years. And in 5 years, from 1937, it was impossible. So all I wanted to do was to get to England. And Mom and Dad tried to persuade me to do anything else. But eventually they pulled the money together and they sent me for 1 year, and I stayed for 32.
Okay, so what year was that when you finally went?
Pardon?
What year was that when you finally went?
I went in 49.
49.
Yeah, I graduated in June, and we took the boat in
What boat?
July.
Do
We
you
went on the Franconia,
The Franconia.
the Cunard line.
And that turned out to be an important trip.
Yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit about that?
On the Franconia, I met Alfred Bader.
Mm-hmm. And?
And 9 days later, he asked me to marry him. And no, I wasn't thinking of getting married for a start. I was on my big adventure.
Mm-hmm.
And so we corresponded for a while, and I decided, I knew that Alfred needed to have a family because he had lost his own family for so many years, been without a family, and I knew he wanted to have a family, and I wouldn't have been the right person at the time. I had nothing against becoming Jewish, but you can't just hop around and say, with the Protestant groups, which we had been, because we had eventually gone to a United Church service and so on, the difference is not so great, but to decide you want suddenly to become a Jew is not something you can do in a hurry. So.
Did you have any strong feelings about Jews or
No, we knew all kinds of Jews. There were all kinds of Jews. There was a Jewish synagogue in Kirkland.
Mm-hmm.
And Dad, had contacted the rabbi on a number of occasions because Dad was really interested in the Bible, and he studied it, and he had charts of dates and what happened and who did what, and all the rest of it. And I guess there were not too many ministers who were interested in all of that. And Mom would say to him, "Oh, why don't you go to the rabbi and discuss it? You have a sensible discussion." And he did. Many of our friends were Jews.
So it wasn't to be with Alfred at that point.
No.
So you went on, and what did you do in England for the next 25 years?
Well, I didn't really want to teach it, but it was something that it was possible to do at the time. I mean, now we couldn't go across and teach without any preparation and so on. But
where did you settle?
In Bexhill-on-Sea, on the south coast between Hastings and Eastbourne.
And where is that in relation to London?
About 60 miles south of London, pretty well straight down.
Mm-hmm. And what did you teach, and what age level, or what?
I got a job teaching in a private school. The teacher had taken a year off. I can't recall now whether it was illness or whatever, but she had been teaching English, I think, mainly. The English teacher had taken a year off. Rather comical, I'm Canadian going over and teaching English in England, but never mind. They didn't understand what I said for quite a time, and they were absolutely fascinated because I had what they thought was an extravagant wardrobe, which seems hilarious to me.
But they
Mom
were
made
emerging
all my
from war.
clothes, but they'd been through a war,
Mm-hmm.
and so they thought I was remarkable.
They thought you were very wealthy, probably.
All a lie, I made £200 that year, which included my board, which was miserable.
What kind of place did you live in?
Well, there were two of the staff who lived in. I was one, and
Was it a boarding school? Was it a boarding school?
No, it wasn't a boarding school.
Was
It
it
was a
day
day school. But Joe Caldpoise was a PT, physical training, whatever. All right, she was a teacher, and I was an English teacher. But they later on, I moved and was teaching a sixth form. And I think I was teaching history and a bit of French. And eventually, they thought it'd be good if I taught a bit of Spanish, and so, whatever came up in a private school, there aren't all that many teachers.
So, okay.
And I met there the drama teacher. Everybody in the school had drama classes, and there was a festival at the end of the year in which every form put on a sketch of some kind, a piece of a play or whatever. Everybody was in it. And the drama teacher, poor thing, needed help when it came to it because they were costumed. Most of the things were costumed. And I was very interested because I've always been in plays. And so I offered to help. And she had a drama group at her Methodist church, and I went down and joined that, got involved in that. And that's what happened.
So you made costumes?
And in the end, they had just built a new stage connected with the church, and the minister there was very interested in writing plays and putting plays on. He wanted us to perform one of his plays for the first performance, and my friend Chris said, "We can't do that, it's too major a project for us, but we could do a number of different scenes." And so then we considered the costumes. I think I foolishly said, they'd be much nicer if they were in costumes. So we decided we would each make our own. And that was all right until they came to me and said, "Well, I don't know anything about making my own." So I said, "Well, I'll cut it out and then you sew it." But it ended up some of them didn't even know how to sew.
But this is something you learned at
And
home
then,
or something?
In the end, we started a school, and we had the school for about 30 years.
The School of?
School of Speech and Drama.
I see. Oh, that I didn't know. The name of the school was?
Thalia.
Thalia? Oh.
Yeah.
That's the god of arts?
Well, of poetry and pastoral poetry and comedy or something. I can't remember now. I've got a painting of Thalia. Very thrilled to find that.
Very good. And you stayed at the same school for the 20?
No.
Okay, go on.
I was in a room off a classroom, and it was room to swing a cat, but that would be just about all. And sometime in May, perhaps, I got a very bad cold. And any time I wanted to use the facilities, I had to either wait or go through the classroom. And Chris, who had become a very good friend by that time, we'd worked on plays together and I'd helped her with the season, said, come to our place, we've got a spare room you can stay in and somebody to look after you and it'd be more comfortable, and I never went back.
Okay, so let's just get the dates straight. So you came in
49.
49, excuse me, and you started at this school, and then the theater school.
That didn't begin until 51.
In 51.
Yeah.
And so you stopped working at the first school to work?
I was there for the year. I was there for the year. And so I decided that I would take a diploma in drama, because I didn't have one. And I started working on that, and I was contacted by a Polish woman, and I don't know how that came about, but she said, would I come? She was short of somebody to teach English to foreign students, Polish people who were there. And so I said, well, all right, I'll go, and I went for a while. And at that point, I can't remember what happened. I think somebody else contacted me. I went in the end to Hastings, which was 7 miles away, and taught in a ladies' college there.
The name of the school?
His name I forget at this
Okay.
stage. And I went there saying that I needed to leave in June of that year.
Of 51.
School year did not end until end of July.
Mm-hmm.
I needed to leave in June because my sister was getting married and I was going back for the wedding, and I wanted to be there to help her.
So this was 51.
So that was 51 to 52.
52. So you went back to Canada for the wedding, and then you came back.
Then I went back to England, and after that, I guess we started the school, and I finally went to I think I went to the Downs Junior School to begin with. They had a teacher who had a nervous breakdown fairly near the beginning of school, and they asked if I would go and take a class there, and I did. And that was again for 1 year. And then I went to St. Mark's School, which was in Little Common, which was another 10 miles away, and I taught there for a year. And then somebody contacted me for the grammar school and said, would I go to the grammar school? And I went to the grammar school, and that just continued on until I retired in 80. I think I retired in 80.
And that's after you had reestablished contact with Alfred.
No, well, that's after.
Just-
I retired, yes, after.
Right.
Alfred wrote to me in 75.
And did you get any other academic degrees? In the
Well, yes, I
meantime?
took various acting degrees. I got an NEA, an associate, one thing and another.
And also in theater, and there's something that you have a doctorate, I know, in.
Well, I have, but this is honorary doctorates.
Honorary doctorates. Okay, so we'll get to that in a bit. So once you finished and retired, and then do you want to say anything else about your teaching career and anything that you enjoyed about it, your life in England, that you want to tell us in terms of your history before we move on?
Well,
Did you enjoy teaching?
Yeah, I mean, I didn't come back. I had, to begin with, I wrote to Alfred, and finally I stopped writing to Alfred, I guess, in 50, in September in 50, when I decided there was no point in continuing to write to him, and I said I was sorry, but I couldn't decide the way he wanted. And I had said I would go back in October, I suppose, before we had that meeting, and I had a ticket to come back, but I canceled it, and I stayed in England.
And did you enjoy teaching?
I enjoyed the drama side of it, and I enjoyed a great deal of it. I enjoyed making the costumes. But we took on too much. In the end, we opened a costume museum, and I was doing it at night, and to feel.
So when you met Alfred again, and he divorced, and you decided to get married again, then you decided that you would take on being Jewish, and
Well, yes, we had been to a number of different churches. I suppose what happened at one point in Bexhill, the Methodist Church, and it didn't happen only there, but what was happening was that the Methodist Church had joined with the Presbyterian Church. I believe that's the way it was. And no, with the name's gone, begins with a C.
Congregational?
Congregational Church, thank you, how kind. I'm older than you are. And so we moved from the Methodist Church, where we had gone for many, many years, to the Congregational Church. I don't quite know why that was, but it was. And I was unhappy with some of the things that were being said, and with one particular minister at the Congregational Church who was really unbearable. And I believed in God, but I simply couldn't believe some of the things that they were getting up to, and beginning to talking anti-Semitism and so on, and I couldn't bear with that. So I thought, well, this is maybe not for me.
And the question of Jesus as a Messiah, which is intrinsic to Christianity, is something that you have to give up if you embrace Judaism. Did you have...
Well, I know that my mother in particular was alone from 85, and she died. Dad died in 75, and she died in 86. So she was alone for a long time. Latterly with me, because she came to England in 80. She missed my father terribly. I mean, he was 93 when he died, and they had a wonderful life together. Dad was 38 when he married, and you don't think you're going to have that many years. They had almost 55 years together before he died. And she was always reading the Bible too, very interested, but she certainly relied on her belief that Jesus was there. And I never had any particular feeling about that at any time.
So then you and Alfred married in 81, is that correct?
No, 82,
82.
January 82.
82. And did the conversion process begin then or before?
No. I mean, everything was brand new to me.
Mm-hmm.
Everything. And Alfred was working, and he was introducing me to 500,000 people all at once, and we were traveling hither and yon. We were away so often, and twice a year we were off to England. We went in the middle of May and didn't come back to the end of July, and we went in October and didn't come back to the end of December.
Mm-hmm.
And then, of course, we weren't in England, we were all over Europe and
Right.
so on. I had no time to do a great deal. We went straight away to Antisfard.
With Rabbi Shapiro.
And I studied with Rabbi Shapiro when we were here, but I didn't have time to do much of anything except try and find my feet.
And was it uncomfortable or comfortable, or did you feel welcome?
Oh yes, I felt welcome. There were one or two folks who didn't feel very welcoming to me, and I could understand that. But I mean, on the whole, I felt welcome, but there was a great deal to do in the house, you know. Great deal to do in the house and the garden. I loved the garden.
How did you like Milwaukee?
Well, Milwaukee was fine.
It was a bigger city than you were used
Well,
to.
it was bigger, but it wasn't in the enormous city. And I realized after a while, it doesn't much matter what the size of it is. In a way, all you get to know is a certain area. And I got to know well the people that I was with on many occasions.
And did you learn to read Hebrew, didn't you?
Yes, I did after a fashion.
I know
But
that because I
have-
sit next to you, so I know
Yeah.
that you do.
Yeah, but I have more and more trouble reading. I've in the last couple of days, I've thought to myself, I manage because I use my eyes separately and I use them together and I shut one and open the other and I blink and blink. I don't see well, and I have been to see a new doctor and had a cataract off on my left eye, but I have always been right eye dominant, and it has upset me. I find it very difficult to read, and I find Hebrew almost impossible to read. I simply can't see it.
Were there any people who you found as good role models in this process in the process of embracing Judaism?
Well, I mean, I visited Jewish families here, and particularly in Montreal, because we visited Montreal where Alfred had been in his early years. And here there were the Klitzners. And
Why don't you explain who the Klitzners are?
pardon?
Explain for the
Well, Alfred's best friend and business partner and advisor on all matters was Marvin Klitzner and his wife Jane and their family, the 3 children, but they were gone by that time. And Jane was very good in taking care of me when I went to Antisfard, because of course I was sitting separately from Alfred, and a wonderful friend.
anybody else?
At the time, I suppose, I don't know that there was anybody else.
And when did you start going to Lake Park Synagogue?
I can't remember the year, but obviously it was fairly soon after Lake Park had begun. We didn't go straight away. I can't remember when it began. Do you?
83.
83.
Mm-hmm. So, yeah, I think it was founded in 83, and the building is 87 or 88, something like that.
I went when it was in the house, the original smaller house. And I remember in particular this because I sat behind Irma Fiedler
Mm-hmm.
and was frequently in communication with her hat.
That's right, she's the one who wore
Yeah.
the big hats. And did you find that to be a welcoming community?
Oh yes, they were all very good.
And you could walk there.
And we could walk there. This was, of course, the great thing. We didn't have to drive.
Right? And it's such a pleasant walk to get
Yeah.
there. And Alfred felt welcome there too, I would
Yes,
assume.
oh yes.
And were you involved, when Alfred stopped working at Aldrich Chemicals and became much more involved in the art world, was this something that you were part of as well?
You mean, was I part of the move, part of the artwork, part of...
Involved in knowing about the sales and the selection and, the kinds of things that
Of paintings.
Of paintings.
Well, Alfred was buying paintings from the age of 10.
Right.
So everywhere we went, when we were not actually in a chemical company or dealing with chemicals, if there were time at lunch, we might go to a museum. We didn't bother with food. Certainly we went to the main auctions in many countries, particularly in England and in New York. And we always went in, and he shot off, and he'd say, "Meet your so-and-so," and he would come round, and say, "Which is the best painting? Which one do you like?" I said, "I'm only down 2 sides of this room," and but I was in on it. I mean, sometimes I liked what he liked. Sometimes I made comment about it, and I wondered if it was really as wonderful as he thought it was. But I learned something, no question, about paintings. When he was fired from Sigma Aldrich in '92, we had already our business trip planned across Europe, and so we continued to make those appointments and do the purchases that were connected with it. And when we were coming back, he said, "I know what I want to do now is to do full-time the art business," and so that's what he started.
Did the purchase of the gallery space at the
At the Astor.
At the Astor, was that then, or was that there already?
No. Alfred had suggested that we, much earlier on, he had suggested that it would be nice if we had some little place where we would have an art room. And he was thinking of hiring something. And I said, "Oh my goodness me, please, could we not do up the basement? We'll have it all done up properly and so on, and the paintings there." I said, "If we've got to turn out in the middle of the, weekends and nights and so on, for somebody who wants to see a painting, it'll be a great turmoil in our life. So please let me have a go at the basement." And I did that, and that we had for quite a number of years. And so we didn't go elsewhere and have the gallery until after we came back in '92. And I don't know how long it was. We looked at several places and decided that the Astor would be a good fit, in that it was secure. There was security there, and it was a big enough room big enough space to turn into a gallery, and that's how that came about.
Is that gallery still in existence?
It's still there, and Ann Zulke is the office manager. There's for a while, David took over, and we had on the computer, and he kept it up to date. But we no longer have the supply of paintings because we used to get paintings in Europe.
And do you consider yourself something of a partner in the business, or do you consider, until Alfred became ill, did you consider yourself a partner in the business, or a helpmeet in the business?
Yes. I was part of everything that was going on, but I certainly wasn't doing the nitty-gritty. He had various secretaries, as he called them, to begin with. Some of whom were particularly bossy, and one who told him he didn't know what he was doing with art and so on, which is trying. But
that wouldn't sit well with him.
I mean, the trouble is, it's very difficult to let people go. You have to be careful they don't sue you for discrimination because they're a woman or dear knows what. And so Anne has proved very successful, and she's very, very competent. And since he had started Bader and Klitzner long before, Marvin was the person who looked after the properties, and Alfred looked after the painting side of it. And of course, when Marvin and Jane Medallion were in Israel, although they came back, it was left finally for Alfred to be dealing with it, and Anne has done that. They have only one property now in Racine, and she sees to that.
What kind of a property is it?
They have a mall somewhere in Racine, and it had been let on long-term lease, and not kept up over the years, one way and the other. It's been a big time and headache too, but Then Daniel is now in on that, and he and Anne deal with it. What's going on there, I know because I'm told from time to time, but I have nothing to do with that.
Now, I noticed in doing a little reading that there are a number of places at Victoria University that have your name on them. There's a theater, an Isabel Bader Theater. Can you tell me about how that came about?
Well, Alfred never wanted to support buildings. He didn't want his name on buildings. He wanted to support the best and the poorest, so that he gave scholarships or funds for people who we thought were the best. Many chemists who have gone on, some of them getting the Nobel Prize and so on, were supported by him in the early years of their careers. And then for students or people who are difficulty getting into into universities at all, he always wanted to support. But he knew that I was interested in the theater, and I guess the first thing, I can't remember, the old Vic came up for sale in London. I'm sorry about this, it's vague now. And a Canadian Mirvish family took it over from Toronto. And they ran it. I was very pleased. The Canadian was going to save the old Vic from falling apart altogether. And we were coming down from London to Bexhill on one occasion, and in the paper here it was that the Mirvishes were giving up. And so the old Vic was for sale, and he said, "Shall we buy the old Vic?" And I said, "Good gracious, what are we going to do with the old Vic?" So we said, well, Heather can run it. One of my nieces is bitten by the drama bug. It's a very bad bug to get, and she has spent her life working in drama and all the other things you do when you don't do that successfully to earn a living. And so then he said, well, how be we offer it to, I don't think it was Queen's, it may have been Queen's, he may have phoned up and asked David Smith about offering it to Queen's. Anyway, they said, no, we have enough trouble with Hurstman Sue, thank you very much. So we said, how be we offer it to Roseanne Runta, who is the president of Vic. And so he
President
said...
of...
Pardon?
President of Victoria.
Victoria, yes.
Okay,
sorry.
so we were talking Old Vic, so I don't want to get confused.
The old Vic. Yeah. No, she said you could have a Vic here. So she said, no, she said, really, I don't think so. She said, if the Mirvishes couldn't run that theater, there's no way that we could run it from here. But she said, if you want a Vic, so why not build your own theater at Vic? We have a wonderful space for it, because on the original plans of Victoria, there was an area for a theater which we have never had the money to build. We have 2 tennis courts on it at the moment, but it's right there, just dandy. And so after considerable negotiation, particularly with the last man, who absolutely refused to give permission for us to have it because it was his tennis court and he'd always played on it, I can't remember how they managed to, I don't know whether they bought him off or what they did, but he eventually gave in. And so he said, well, it has to be called the Isabel Bader Theater. And I said, but I don't want my name on the theater, you know. Anyway, that was the condition. It was that or nothing. So it was that.
So it does student productions, or it does professional productions, or both?
There's classes in the daytime, ordinary classes, mm-hmm. and there are performances in the evening, and it's let out privately. The Toronto Film Festival, that's one of the venues for the Toronto Film Festival.
Nice. That's a very prestigious film festival. That's wonderful.
I mean, they're not all, the films are playing in all sorts of places, but that is where they play some of them.
What are some of the other philanthropic endeavors that you've had a say in, or you've had some ideas about that you might, the castle in England?
Well, the castle in England was another thing that we sort of found, first of all, on the train coming down. We had visited Europe, and one of the places that we visited for the first time was Kiev, which used to be called Gaia, and that is where his family came, the Bader family came from. And so...
And where is that?
Pardon?
Where is that again?
In the Czech Republic.
Okay.
Well, in Czechoslovakia as it was when we went first. And we drove there with a very, very good friend from Pardubice in the northern part of Czech Republic, and tried to find any relatives. There was a museum which was not open when we first arrived. Well, it was 5 o'clock and they were just closing. And we eventually went to the cemetery, which had been partly knocked down, but there was a portion of it with some Bader names. And we inquired around if anybody knew of anybody by the name of Bader. To begin with, there was a Bader over there, of course. There was nobody that we could find. And then one morning, Vladimir, who is our friend, had been out looking before we got up for breakfast, and he came in and said, I found the person who is the last Bader that anybody knows anything about, and she has the property right across the square from our hotel. And so we got to meet her, and on the trip we had passed by the first castle that he wanted to buy for me, which belonged to the Cherigny, that is his mother's family, and it was 5 miles from Gaia. Now, how the Baders and the Cherignys came to meet, that's had nothing to do with the proximity of those two places, but at any rate, that's where we first saw it. And he wanted to buy this castle, and I said, no, what on earth are we going to do with the castle in Czechoslovakia? And so we passed that one by, and then he found coming down another castle, Hever Castle, which was in Sussex. I should have said yes to Hever. It's a lovely little castle. Anyway, I said no, no to Hever. And then we were coming down. Have we got to go?
No, I just thought I might have jostled the camera.
And this is a castle, and this castle he showed me on the paper. I said, oh, Herstmonceux. And the name Herstmonceux is not an easy pronunciation to know. I said, I know that. I've been there. I've actually been in the castle. I went to the wedding of a girl who was married in the little church up the hill there, and she worked at the castle, and you're allowed to have your reception, if you like, in the castle. And so I had been to the reception. So that was the story of Herstmonceux. So he said, well, let's look into it. So I said, well, what are we going to do with that castle, really, Alfred? Come on, let's be sensible. Anyway, he asked me as soon as we got home and got ourselves in and had breakfast, I had to go into town to shop, so he asked me if I would go in and look about this castle. And I did, and the upshot of that was, in the end, he offered it to his university, Queen's, to David Smith, and the Member of Parliament for Kingston and the Islands happened to be in England at the time, and Principal Smith phoned to Milliken and said, will you go down and look at this property and see what you think? And they decided it was a possibility that they could do something with it as a center for International Student Center. And that's
what
how we came to have Herstmonceux.
So that's quite impressive inside.
Yeah.
And I noticed also that Bader papers are at Toronto University.
Bader?
Papers, the family papers, that there are some family papers located, like letters from you and Alfred to each other and your family.
Oh, there. No, I don't. You think they're at Vic?
Yeah. Family papers at the Special Collections at Toronto University.
Where did you find that?
Well, I just Googled it.
Pardon?
I Googled it. I looked it up.
Well,
And some of your family papers are there too, I believe. Your mother's letters.
if I can say anything about the letters, it is that Alfred kept all the letters that I wrote to him
Right.
in the 49-50 period. And he wanted to have those, he wanted to have those published. And I said, please, Alfred, these were, I'm just an ordinary person. I was writing letters to you, and they weren't meant for anybody else. They weren't meant, some people, I think, write letters imagining that in the future they're going to have them done something with. I said I had no plans for that. And they're very private, and I really, please, no. But you know Alfred well enough perhaps to know that it's no good saying no. And the time came when I thought to myself, I really cannot spend any more of my effort and so on saying no, please. So I said, well, I guess I wrote you the letters, Alfred, and if you want to get them published, get on with it then. And he had the book published, that's quite true. He had the book published, and he sent the letters to the principal at the time at Vic, who was Roseanne Runta.
Mm-hmm.
And he's very happy with the book. And he's doing the same thing with the letters that we wrote after he wrote to me in 75, before we were married.
Yeah, I sense that you're a much more private person than he is, but...
Yeah, he doesn't understand that people, well, he's...
That's all right. We marry who we marry.
Yeah.
When you think about our Milwaukee community, do you have any reflections on the Jewish and non-Jewish community, the arts community, the Jewish community that you want to share with us?
Well, the Lake Park situation has been a very complicated one, because the older families have moved away, died, and so on. And I think the original families were largely professional families around about who wanted to have a synagogue to which they could walk and didn't have to travel if they weren't Orthodox and did not drive. And they were families who were able and willing to be more generous in the upkeep. And I guess in the early days, when you buy a property and fix it up, it's some time before you have to start remodeling and redoing because things leak. And as the years have gone by, everything has become more expensive. And there is also the problem with the proximity of the Chabad house. And the community there had been very vibrant, with a very compelling rabbis. And there were people at some time who went to both. And one of the major, or one or two of the major supporters of the whole area became very protective of Lake Park and felt that the other one was drawing them away. And it's caused a lot of unhappiness, I think, which we could well do without. Goodness knows we make everybody else unhappy by not accepting what they want to do. And certainly Lake Park has had difficulties in trying to keep going. education-wise, we've always tried to help. And Alfred has done that, and now Bader Philanthropies, has taken over, and there's tremendous support for education, Jewish education, all kinds of education, actually.
Right, I know the support for Hillel and the other schools
Yeah.
has been very impressive.
And, there's support for trying to do something with education in Milwaukee with
In the inner cities.
with the inner city. I mean,
Yes.
it seems to be completely impossible to crack that. Money's not the answer, but
There's Bader Philanthropies and there's also Helen Bader Philanthropies. Are they going to merge or will they stay separate?
Alfred has always said that whenever we were anywhere, you see, we supported all kinds of things: Edinburgh University, Glasgow University, Imperial College University, Sussex University, all kinds of places in many countries. Those are just in England, well, Scotland, but and he has always said, I would do this for 3 years. So the support for whatever it is I'm supporting for 3 years. And so when it get towards the end, what will happen. After that, Daniel will look out to it. Daniel will see to it. Daniel will see to it. Poor old Daniel, all these years has been going to see to it. And so when it came to the point where Alfred had his stroke and things were getting more complicated and so on, the Helen Bader Foundation, which had started in 92, Helen died in 89, and got up and running, I guess, by 92, had been for 30 years, so 92, 02, 12, 22, I guess. No. And latterly, it was running to the point where it was really going to be grandfathered. And by that time, the boys, Daniel and David, had thought to themselves that it would be a good idea to take a chunk of money and set that aside so that they could support things which Alfred was not actively supporting. Alfred liked to write a check. If Alfred found a group that he wanted to help, he wanted to write the check and give them the check. He always wanted everything paid before it was due. And he would contact people and say, you haven't sent the account. I can't, why don't you send me the account? I want to pay it. That has caused problems in many directions, but that's the way he was. So in the downturn of financial affairs some years ago, the Helen Bader Foundation lost a good deal of their income because the rates went down. And they had also committed many things out for 3 years and were obliged to support those. So new things were going to be in difficulty, in which case they might have had to reduce the staff and so on. So Alfred inquired, I don't know whether this is legal for me to say this or not, Alfred inquired whether there was any possibility of his contributing to the Helen Bader Fund to support some of the things so that they wouldn't have to let the staff go. And they obviously had to inquire into that, which they did. And Jerry McGaffey, who is the chief lawyer in the affair and the finance man, found that in fact it was. And so that's what he did for 2 or 3 years. And then at that point, they decided that Alfred was being less able to deal with affairs, and it would be a good idea to begin a foundation. Alfred just thought he could, hand it all over and say, well, here, you guys are doing this all these years, got plenty of expertise, carry on, just add ours. But they weren't able to do that, and the Helen Bader side, particularly Helen's niece, were very anxious to keep the name going. And so they made Bader Philanthropies. I finally worked on that, called it Bader Philanthropies. And there are the 2 parts to it. There's the Helen Bader, which they have decided to call Helen Daniels Bader, and there's the Isabel and Alfred Bader.
Got it. So we have a bunch of summary questions. I think that we're getting to that point. One of them is, what have you learned in life and what are you most proud of?
I've learned that life is very complicated and I'm getting older and tired. I'm happy with many of the things that we've done. I wish that they could have been more under wraps, but that's the way it is.
Any regrets?
I don't think there's any point in having any regrets, really. You know, Alfred still feels that I should have married him in the first place, but it wouldn't have been possible. He's so determined in what he believes is right that he pushes until in the end you give, and it's not always wise.
What was the happiest moment of your life?
I don't know. Maybe it was when I got on the boat on the way to England.
And is there something about yourself you think no one knows?
I don't think there's anything that not no one knows. No.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there are many things that lots of people don't know.
And how would you like to be remembered?
Well, I suppose as somebody who tried to do the best she could.
Is there anything you wanted to talk about that we didn't get to?
I don't know.
I guess I would like to ask, your sister's still alive, is that
No,
correct?
Marion died in January 15.
January 15. And your brother?
My brother's still alive. He's my baby brother, and he's 87.
And where does he live?
He lives in BC.
Oh, very.
Almost all his family lives in BC.
And he has family, children, and so
He
nieces and nephews.
has 3 sons and 1 daughter. The first son had 3 girls. The second son had 1 girl and 1 boy. The third son had 2 girls. The daughter had 2 girls and 1 boy. But the 1 boy is not an Overton, of course.
Mm-hmm.
He has the father's name. And the only Overton is Wayne Overton, who had a son, Jeremy Overton, who has just had a baby, Norman Overton. So at last, there is 1 Overton. So that's all very exciting. They're thrilled.
Well, it sounds like a very full and satisfying life, and we thank you for sitting for this interview, and we hope that lots of people can use this information. And it's a pleasure on my part to know you and to have you as a friend.
Thank you, Jane. You're dear.